right, we should be live. So thank y'all so much for tuning in tonight. We are lucky to have Miss Barbara Smith on YouTube with us. Now the YouTube runs at about a 20-minute lag, but there is the option to ask questions on the chat. There we go. So there is the option to ask questions in a live chat, and any questions we get in the chat box, we will definitely address. A little about Barbara. She is the author of Addiction, One Cause, One Solution, which is her first book, and a really interesting look at recovery that's a little bit different from some of the old paradigms that look at addiction as a moral failing or look at addiction as a progressive chronic disease. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about the book?
Sure. Well, let me first, if I may, just start with telling you a little bit about myself, because I think that leads into how we got into the book. I co-authored this book with a colleague of mine in Scotland, in Glasgow, Scotland. And she is, her name is Christian McNeil, and she is someone who also found this understanding that we describe in the book about 10 years ago. But she is in recovery herself, a long-term stable sobriety. And I am not. But I am a psychotherapist who's worked in the field of addictions for well over 30 years at this point. So we both brought to this our perspectives, both that have been transformed really significantly by this new understanding that we describe in the book. So just to tell you that I had worked in the field of addictions. I'd worked in a number of treatment centers, and then I had a number of, I've had a private practice and worked with people in recovery in all stages of recovery for, you know, many, many, many years. And I was getting, a few years ago, I was getting really burned out with the work that I was doing. It felt really, I just started questioning it. I thought, you know, what are we doing? You know, I mean, it was really, to be honest, pretty depressing. We weren't seeing a lot of great results. You know, people were being mandated into 12-step programs, and, you know, you were wrestling them to the ground to go. And, you know, it just felt awful. And there was a lot of stuff coming out saying that addiction was incurable, and that, you know, and it just felt so dark. And, you know, and I remember saying to so many clients over the years, you know, what about the joy? Like, where's your joy? You know, they'd be coming in, they might've had like 20 years in sobriety, and they were still struggling with anxiety and depression, and there was no joy. And they were, you know, so caught up in all of their character defects, and, you know, it just was really hard. And many, many people that I worked with did not want to go to 12-step meetings, or went to 12-step meetings and didn't like the God talk. And, you know, so I was working with people, sort of helping them to design a program for them that worked. But it felt like something was really missing. And I guess at that point, I just figured that was the best we were going to get. So I was sort of resigned to that. And then I thought, well, do I really want to do this for the rest of my life? So, as often happens when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And I was introduced to a new understanding of mental health and addiction recovery about 6 years ago now. And that understanding has transformed my life in ways that I could never have imagined. I now see people getting well. Number one, in my practice, I see people getting well within about 6 weeks of doing this work. And I know this sounds too good to be true, but it's not. My clients would come in and were like, I'm fine. You know, my great stable clinical practice like went up in smoke because people were getting better and they were moving on in their lives and having a good life. And that never really occurred to me as a possibility. So I became really interested in sharing this in the field of addictions because I thought, you know, we need to spread some more of this understanding around. And that's when I got involved with some of the people like Christian and Joe Bailey and Amy Johnson and other people who share this understanding in the field of addictions and habits. And we've put together a conference that's coming up, and I'll give that a plug. It's the first, I'll refer to something as the 3 principles, but the first 3 principles conference coming up in, it's been postponed, but it'll be probably all virtual in September 17th to the 19th. You'll hear, if you go onto the website, which is 3precoveryconference.com, you will see a lot of the speakers who will be there, and it's going to be just a fantastic event. So we hope that, you know, if you're interested in what I'm saying, you'll find your way to that. We do have scholarships, and we really want to encourage anybody who is interested to join us. So that being said, Christian and I hooked up a couple of years ago. She heard me talking on another program, and she contacted me and asked me to talk on one of her programs. And we both just sort of said, well, how about, you know, we write a book together, and we did. And it's been, it's taken off, you know, well, first of all, it came to a screeching halt because just about as the time it was published, the pandemic hit. But then we decided to do a program, which we'll be doing on Facebook, called Recovery from the Inside Out. And that starts this Sunday. And where we're actually going through the book and just trying to describe a little bit different, you know, a little bit more in depth what we're pointing towards in the book. So I just wanted to say that this understanding, for those of you who have been around mental health, been around recovery programs, this is really a breath of fresh air. It is what we see as an evolution in the field of addiction treatment. Addiction, you know, I used to work with a psychiatrist back in the 80s who had been trained, you know, in the early, like the 1930s. He was an older guy and he'd been trained early on. And they used to give ice water enemas to treat depression. You know, so our understanding
that would do something, wouldn't it?
Yes, that would do something. That would sort of wake you up, I think. But you know, our understanding of addiction treatment really was formed at a time in the 1940s with the whole disease concept, where we really thought that made sense. And it really was an evolution. It was actually a very compassionate evolution from going from a moral failing to then seeing it as a disease where people needed help rather than scorn or jail or whatever. So it evolved and that was helpful, but now we see its time has, it clearly isn't helping as many people as it could be helping. And this understanding we do see as the next evolution in the treatment world. So one of the things that we describe, or what we describe, is what we call the inside out understanding, or the inside out recovery from the inside out. And the concept of this, it's not really a concept, it's actually a principle. It's describing how the human psychological system actually works. So it's actually very scientific. It's not, you know, there's now over 600 different types of psychotherapy that are all theory-based. As is the DSM, the Diagnostic Manual, is all theory based, and they're revised every couple of years because the theories are evolving, right? So this is actually something that describes something that is grounded in truth. And for people who read it, you know, we hope that that grounding in the truth really seems to be what helps turn people's lives turn around very dramatically. So what we now know, the way that I was trained classically, and we were under the belief that we were taught that people's feelings, their feelings of unhappiness, their feelings of sadness, their feelings of whatever, were coming from two sources. One was their thinking. Everybody knew thinking was a big part of it. And so we have many, many different types of thought therapy, cognitive therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, you know, DBT, positive psychology, all kinds of things that will help you manipulate thought. But we also were trained to believe that feelings and our emotional states were due in part to the things that happened to us in life. And that looked like truth to me, you know, just like my peers look like truth that, you know, maybe an ice water enema would help treat depression.
Well,
but
you're taught something exactly.
Right. So now, you know, what this understanding, and I'll just throw out this name because it's important if people want to pursue it. There was a man by the name of Sidney Banks who had a very profound insight and aha moment in the 1970s. And he just started talking about what he had seen about the link between spirituality and psychotherapy and or psychology and the way that the human operating system actually works. And so, you know, this was transformative for so many people. And a group of psychologists started talking with him, and this is where this all started out in the Pacific Northwest in the 1970s. And it has grown from being this tiny, tiny little group of people now to these huge international conferences. It's caught on, and sort of like the pandemic in certain areas, like in the New York area and the London area and all around the world. So it's become, we believe that it's going to transform the field of psychology completely in the next 25 years. But as we know, these changes come about slowly. At first, they're generally pretty well resisted. But I think a lot of people in the field of psychology, and certainly in the field of recovery, are at a place where they're just so frustrated. It's like, come on, give us something new, right? One of the things that I say in the book is, you know, most of my clients who've been through multiple treatments said that they could teach the classes. And that's not doing anything. There's no change there until there is. And what this understanding points to is what it is that we're looking for and what it is that in fact actually changes people on a deeper level. So this is talking about change on a much more profound and a deeper level. Go ahead, Miles. I'm cutting you off here.
Oh, no worries. No worries. So if addiction as moral failing is kind of the addiction 1.0, and addiction as progressive chronic disease is kind of addiction and treatment 2.0. Tell us a little bit more about what recovery 3.0 might look like.
Well, if you talk to anyone who has gotten sober, okay, they have gotten sober by seeing something that they did not see before, right? I mean, you have to see something more clearly in order to be able to shift your behavior, right? You have to, you know, a lot of people, you'll hear many, many people, and those of you who are listening in, you know, many people figure it out in college. You know, I can't handle this stuff. I know lots of people like that who just, you know, I have a friend who knows I can't touch red wine. I can't can't deal with it, and he hasn't in his 70s. I know other people are like, I never touch the hard stuff, can't handle that stuff. I mean, we actually have built into us a design. The human design is really quite remarkable, both in our body and in our psychology. So really what we're pointing to is the fact that you're designed to wake up. You're designed to be able to see yourself and the world around you more clearly. That's built in. That's part of the operating system. And that when you start to see, oh, when you start listening for aha moments, and you start listening for this sort of tap on the shoulder that says, no, that's not really a great idea. Rather than looking outside, we're now looking from the inside out. We're listening more carefully for this sort of direction. It becomes so much, it's such a much better process than trying to fill your intellect full of information. Right. So when people are going into treatment centers, or even in and I used to work in a treatment center, a wonderful treatment center for 15 years, and we would bring these people in and start teaching them stuff. And, if teaching stuff, people, like one of the great failures of the war on drugs was when we tried to teach little kids about the dangers of drugs. Well, we all know how well that worked, right? I personally grew up with a cancerous lung outside my, my gymnasium in elementary school, designed to scare us to death. And yet, I picked up cigarettes when I was a teenager. So if information was the thing that fixed people, we would be fixed because we got a lot of information. You can go online and find lots and lots and lots of information, but information doesn't change us at any kind of real transformational level. And so what this understanding points to is that there is, again, an operating system that when we understand how it works, that in fact, it does not work 3 ways, or it doesn't work 2 ways. Our feelings aren't coming from thinking and from circumstances. Once you correct that misunderstanding of where our experience is actually coming from, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. Once you correct that, and once you start to see, wow, look at what my mind is really capable of doing, I am capable of having a transformation through this, this intelligence that keeps coming through me. And there's actually nothing I have to do. And there's certainly nothing I have to learn. And in fact, all the stuff that I've been trying to learn to fix myself or fix it may have actually been getting in the way. And that's pretty cool. It's kind of like what happens with the human body. We have this, the way I see it is that we have this psychological immune system that sort of writes itself. It's writing itself all the time and recalibrating itself. If you look at what's happening with the pandemic, 3 months ago, none of us had any clue. And now we're all adapting and, finding our way and making really creative masks and coming up with really creative solutions to all different kinds of things. We didn't have to go to a course to learn that. It's built in.
So if people have a built-in sense of intelligence or kind of built-in guidance, is there something that they can do to kind of improve their hearing or their ability to tune into that felt sense or that guidance?
Well, yeah, the one thing I would say to that is you can hear things a lot better when the noise is turned down. Right. So one of the things that's
noise ratio.
Right. Yeah. There you go. So one of the things that Christian talks a lot about in her part of the book, and that we both now call what we call subtractive psychology, a colleague of ours, Jamie Smart, came up with that term, and we really like it a lot. What this does is it takes things off your mind rather than putting things, to-do lists on your mind. So Christian talks about in her, in her part of her story, she was in recovery and it was like a full-time job. She had to meditate, keep a journal, do a, a men's list, do service, do. And, like many of the people who were in recovery, they were doing the same thing and really locked and trapped in an endless, search for some peace and for some happiness, and always searching to this to-do list. And if you didn't do it right, I know for me with meditation, even though I taught all my clients how to meditate, I was constantly, oh, well, I didn't do it enough. I need to do it more. Well, maybe if I did this type of meditation, well, if I did it before bed, if I woke up and I did it in the morning, maybe if I did, I need to do it more. And it would just, it would just add and add and add and add to my sense of, undoing, if you will. I mean, I just was like searching for something, and it was just like, it wasn't happening. So when we tell people, well, actually, and this is one of the things that my clients absolutely love about this, there's nothing to do, but what there is something to see. And so to answer your question more fully, what we see when we're looking in the right direction, you're much more likely to see what you're looking for, right? And when you turn down the noise of all this endless concept of what it is we're supposed to be doing to be well, we hear a lot more clearly the directive that says, I don't think that's a good idea. You'll listen to people who pick up and they'll say, I knew I shouldn't have done that, right? But, right? And so, there is this sort of what we call an inner GPS that we know. And I used to consider myself an insight-oriented psychotherapist. Insight psychotherapy was a really important part of my career, but I thought that I, as a therapist, was helping people to have insights. Nobody ever really asked the question, well, what is insight and where does it come from? Like, we weren't asking those kinds of questions, the deeper questions.
Well, there's for a lot of people, I think there's no time when you're kind of part of this, I don't want to be offensive, but what can sometimes feel like assembly line medicine, right? There's, at least for me, I know it sometimes feels like there's just no time to answer the deeper questions if I'm operating in that system. Does that kind of resonate with your experience at the time when you were kind of working in the treatment system?
Yes. Yeah, sure. And a lot of the things that we did, first of all, let me just say that I would have given my right arm, as all of my colleagues would have done, to help alleviate the suffering of my clients. It was all I wanted. I was committed to it. I loved my clients. I wanted so desperately to help them. But the traditional training was actually putting more stuff in innocently, and totally innocently. Nobody I knew was setting out to make it harder for people, but innocently, it was putting more things on people's minds that they needed to do to be okay. And once we correct the misunderstanding, and I just want to take a minute to talk about that, and then certainly open up for any questions or whatever, but right now, I think that's sort of a hole here. Once we correct this misunderstanding of where feelings are actually coming from and where your relief for those feelings is coming from, once you get that, it's like, oh, well, why didn't anybody ever tell me this before? That's the main question right off the bat. Like, why doesn't everybody know this? And it's like, oh, it's kind of like a chiropractic adjustment. It's like, oh, okay, well, that feels better. That's good. So let me talk a little bit about that. So like I started to say, right, we were trained to think, classically trained to think that our experience came from two places. Number one was all our childhood experiences and all that stuff that, created our mood states. And so as a result, as in psychotherapy, we would go on this endless search for, why are you still so unhappy? So I tell this story often. I had a client for 12 years. And after 12 years, we were still talking about her mother. And she's like, I don't want to talk about this. And I was like, I don't really want to either. But, we need to obviously heal this and fix it and understand it. And the treatment center that I worked at right before my last treatment center that I actually worked in, we took a 15-page history. 15 pages of history of all the possible reasons out of someone's childhood and trauma and history, that could be the source of their suffering. So that was really instilled in us. And I had many clients come in and say, I really don't want to talk about the past. And they would say, well, then, and I would say, well, then you won't get better. And they'd say, well, why? I said, well, because you have to heal the past in order to move forward. And they'd say, well, why? And I'd say, well,
because that's what I was taught in grad school.
Because that's what I was taught in grad school. Yeah. Right. Only I was seeing all these people who, like two kids from the same family who had pretty much the same childhood, had two totally different experiences of their childhood. And that was the case in my family too. Like my sister said, I had a really happy childhood. I was like, what childhood did you have? So what when you really start to hold this up to logic, right, it doesn't hold up. So one of the things Sidney Banks always says is psychological. It's logical. So, William James, who was the father of psychology, said once we find the principles behind human psychology, that is going to be the greatest discovery since fire. And that's what we believe has been discovered here. It's just logic. It makes sense. It's not anything I have to do a song and dance to sell to people. Well, yeah, okay. What you're experiencing moment to moment is not your childhood. What you're experiencing is your thinking about your childhood. And that, Sidney Banks referred to thought as the missing link. So again, you can have two kids who have the same childhood. You can have the same exact thing happen to a whole group of different people, and they're all going to have a different perception based on how they think about it. This is a jump. It's a jump for people, but if you really hold it up, and all we ask people to do in the book and in the world of the principles is to say, try it out. See if it's possible for something else. People would come in and say to me all the time, I know somebody can't put a feeling into me. And I was like, oh, yes, they can. They have your control panel and they have the key and no, they can't. Like somebody can't put a feeling into you. How does that happen? Like, it has to come through your way of seeing things. Right. And once you start to correct that misunderstanding that your experience is coming from both circumstances, people, places, and things, and thought, to just understanding the simplicity of this design, which is that we are always and only experiencing our thinking in any given moment. Once you start to see that simplicity, the mind starts to settle down. You realize, oh, there's nothing I have to do about this. Everybody comes in, they're like, give me something to do. Give me homework. I'm like, no, there's nothing to do. There's something to see. No, I need to have, like, no, there's nothing to do. There's something to see. And it takes a long time, sort of like releasing a muscle that just keeps firing and firing. If you've ever had acupressure, just press it until it lets go. And once people let go of this idea that there's something they have to do to be okay, it's like, oh, okay. Now, how does this relate to addiction? So for people who, number one, who think that they've been traumatized and all their suffering is coming from their past, they're pretty screwed, right? Because most addicts have come from a pretty difficult past, and there's no way around that, right? But not everyone who comes from a difficult past, picks up substances, right? So what we now see as the misunderstanding that's driving all of addiction is that you simply are looking outside yourself for something to make you feel better, right?
Ding, ding, ding.
Ding, 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 right? So when you look at that, you know, you can think, oh, this pill is going to make me feel so much better, or this substance is going to make me feel so much better. And for most addicts, that connection has been made in the brain, in the neural pathways of the brain early on. And then it's pretty tough to beat. But if you ask anybody, and we used to ask them this in treatment all the time, like, how long has it been since you felt that good when you used? And they'd be like 25 years. Or if a substance made you happy, why do some drunks cry into their cups? Right? There is no substance that can bring you peace of mind.
I think you touch on a really important point there, and I don't want to interrupt, but
no, please do.
It is a breath of fresh air to hear that, because I see a lot of folks kind of thinking in the disease model who have shifted from using the substance of alcohol or prescription or non-prescription drugs. The mindset kind of stays the same, but they've shifted from this substance I was using to self-medicate, and now because I have a progressive chronic disease, now I need to take my psychiatric medicine, and this is the substance, whether it's an antidepressant or whether it's medication assisted treatment like naltrexone or methadone. Keeping the same mindset that the substance is a thing that's making me okay. And I'm not against antidepressants or medication assisted treatments. But I think the mindset of the substance is making me okay can be a dangerous place to be, because what if there's a pandemic and you run out of your naltrexone, right?
Yeah. Yeah, well, you see a lot of people who switch addictions. You know, I used to work with an old recovering heroin addict who switched to gambling. You know, you see a lot of people switching. You also see a lot of people, when we address this a lot in the book, who, you know, who once you're convinced that you have a disease and that every mood that passes through is yet more evidence of the disease, you know, that we then call dual diagnosis. Well, now you not only have alcoholism, but you have, you know, anxiety and depression, and, you know, and you have to medicate all of those. This is a big topic, and some people are going to be really railing at this, but I just would ask them to start to consider that possibility that, you know, when you really, so let me just talk a minute about thought. So we're talking about how thought really is the only thing that any of us are ever experiencing. And in the field of psychotherapy, like I said, we had all of these treatments to try to treat thought. You know, I often say that I was in the business of thought manipulation. You know, too many of these thoughts, and that's bad. You're anxious. Too many of these thoughts, you're depressed. Too many. You know, if you actually read the DSM, You know, it says you had depressing thoughts for this period of time of this many days during the week. Well, what happened for the rest of the time? Like, where did it go? You know, like, what happened to your depression? Right. So this understanding, it makes just so much sense, Miles, when you really consider there's actually nothing you have to do about thought. If you've ever meditated, you know, people, you know, you just watch the thoughts come and go. Thought just is happening. It's actually quite neutral. You can have all kinds of, we have about 60,000 thoughts a day. They come, they go. You have happy thoughts, you have sad thoughts, you have murderous thoughts, you have, despairing thoughts, and they come and they go. And because actually thought, if you think about it, is the same energy that makes your heart beat, makes the grass grow. I mean, you know, it's just moving through. It's like, I live on the ocean, so we have a lot of currents and tides, and you know, it's an energy. So if I were to say to you, you know, I really would like you to go out and stop the current in the river, or, you know, I really don't think you should, flow that way. You're setting people up for failure. So if I tell you, I do not want you to think about pink elephants tonight, you're going to think about, pink elephants are going to keep popping into your mind, right? Because that's the way it works, right? And when you think certain thoughts or think certain ways, you're going to feel the accompanying feelings, because thought and feeling are sort of the flip side of the same coin.
So if we can think ourselves miserable, and if there's been a lot of history of doing that, is there kind of a blueprint in the book for folks on how to not fight against the current, but how to steer it into something that allows us to think ourselves happy, or think ourselves calm, or at least think ourselves a little bit more peaceful, something in the middle?
No, there's no prescription for how you think. What there is a description of the operating system. And once you start to see the operating system at work, we don't get so caught up in the stories that we write about the content of our thinking, right? So no one is happy all the time. That's not realistic. There are some people who are much happier. I know myself, I am a much happier person understanding this. But there are times when I listen to the news, or I just am laying in bed in the middle of the night, and I feel tremendous despair when I start having that level of thinking. The good news is today, I just let that be what it is. I see this power, number one, as you start to focus on how this all works, and you see the power that personal thinking has, and you see the power, the awesome nature of universal thought, like, at the heart of creativity, and all great works of art and all great works of music that are just, like, wow, this is amazing. But we can, in our personal mind, write these stories that can make us miserable, absolutely miserable, many of which were being perpetrated by this misunderstanding that they were coming from what happened to us, or that we were broken and diseased and need all these tools and medications and things. And please understand, I'm not trying to tell people not to take medication, but I know a lot of people who say, I want to come off of this medication. I don't think this is healthy for me. I don't want to be on it, but I don't know how to do it. Because when I come off, I'll have sad thoughts. And I'm like, okay, well, so do I. We all have sad thoughts sometimes, and then they pass, because that's the nature of it. I think that's what we're really talking about, is the nature of thought, the way that thought works. And when you're sort of in alignment with the way it works, it's just flowing, and we flow with it. rather than like, oh, I'm diseased, I'm broken. This means I have this many thoughts and I have this disorder and now I need to treat it. And instead of like, yeah, okay, here it is again. What we fondly call thought storms. We have them, they pass just like other storms.
So if we were to liken it to this this river or water flowing, it sounds like the gist of the book, which is worth checking out. So this isn't no spoilers. It sounds like the gist of the book is asking if we can stop trying to swim upstream, stop kind of trying to fight away the thoughts that we have, and instead just get out of the river. And can we practice being the observer that watches thoughts, whether happy, whether sad, whether anxious? Is that kind of the gist? Seeing if we can play more the observer instead of getting sucked in or reaching the next level kind of judgment about the thoughts, that we shouldn't be having these thoughts.
I would say it is a much more observant approach, but once you start to see, again, I'm just going to use a metaphor that I think is really helpful. Where we live, there are a lot of rip currents in the ocean. So the advice that everyone is given is if you get caught in a rip current, instead of swimming against it and fighting, which you're going to lose and you'll get really exhausted and then you drown. When you understand how a rip current works, it pulls you out, you ride it out, you relax into it, you ride it out. When it gets to its end, which it does, usually a couple of 100 yards from shore, you swim to the side and then you swim back in. Okay. Now, knowing that that's how it works, right, gives you the information, gives you the direction you need to save your life, basically. So once you see how thought works and you correct the misunderstanding of what you're supposed to be doing about it and where it comes from and all of that, and you see the deeper nature of it all, there is a current of it that you just kind of flow. One of my colleagues describes it as experiencing life as a sieve rather than a pressure cooker. So it's just kind of moving through. So the good news is I don't spend a lot of time. See, when I was a meditator, I used to spend a lot of time observing my thinking, observing my monkey mind, observing it. Now I'm just like, it's like a babbling brook in the background. What I now see, and again, this is a longer conversation than an hour, but what I now see is built into this system is this thing called feelings. And your feelings are what can wake you up to the content of your thinking, right? So if I start feeling really sad, I go ding, 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 ding. Oh, I know where this is coming from. And then you can see, oh yeah, well, look at what you're thinking at this moment. And then you see it and it's like waking up from a daydream and it moves on. So the good news is, again, there's no practice. There's nothing you have to do. There's nothing you have to do to wake up from a daydream. You just become aware. And the awareness is actually, again, built into this remarkable operating system that says, oh, I'm starting to feel really anxious. Oh, now I know where I'm looking.
I think that's a really refreshing message for somebody who might be in early recovery and feeling like there's so many hurdles between, learning the right program or working the right steps and getting better, or recovery, or whatever you want to call it. It sounds like the message in the book is that it might not be a 180 transformation, but something can change right now if you understand the operating system.
It's changing all the time. You know, it's like everything else in nature and everything else in our body. Our skin is sloughing off, our digestive juices are working, right? So you're starting to see, and as particularly as the brain becomes less and less toxic from the substance, you're starting to see more clearly, right? So a lot of people who are in early recovery have an experience we used to fondly call the pink cloud, right? Where it's like, oh, like they start seeing like, oh, holy smokes, what was I thinking? You know, I feel so much better now. Now, what we used to do in the treatment centers, we would squish that. Oh, no, 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 don't trust that. Can't, you know, instead of exploring that, like, wow, well, tell me what you've seen. What have you seen? What's different? And that's how insights, I think, build. You're making yourself more insight friendly, more insight prone. You're looking, you're listening in that direction. So I always tell my people, you know, I do a monthly group online and with a bunch of people, and I call it, what have you seen? You know, because the more you're looking in this direction, the more you're going to see and the more you're going to hear. But when you're looking in the direction of, oh, I didn't do enough, I should do more, I need to get to more meetings, I need to do more of this, I should do more, you know, your mind is so busy and so taken up with all of that, that you don't realize that the operating system is really, really quite remarkable. And it's, you know, Bill W. didn't do the 12 steps. Bill W. had a spiritual awakening in a hospital room in New York City, where he had a tremendous, as did Sidney Banks, had a tremendous aha experience. Now, you know, in my world, we weren't really talking about spiritual awakening and, you know, transformation. I mean, I didn't know that that was possible. But now that I look in this direction, I see that's what's been getting people sober since the beginning of time. And once you start to see, well, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking this way now. I can start to see what is going on here. I mean, I need to see something more that I'm not seeing at this moment. And that we have this system that called an insight that will show us. You know, sometimes it comes like a great big punch in the head, and other times it's just kind of a whisper. But when you're sort of tuned in, it's like tuned into the channel, you're much more likely to hear it and to see more clearly.
So if there are folks out there who are kind of having an awakening as they hear this message, just because it's not one that you hear a lot of the time in the fields of addiction recovery, where can they go to learn more about this approach? First off, the book, right?
I don't know, I guess that's backwards, but the book is called Addiction, One Cause, One Solution. And it's by myself and Christian McNeil. And we are starting a group this week on Facebook. It's starts 2 p.m. Eastern time. It's called Recovery from the Inside Out. You're welcome to join the group. We hope you will. We are taking over for another group that is still sort of in the wings, but they've stopped their regular meetings, called Alcohol Addiction and the Three Principles. And all of their stuff is available on Facebook and on YouTube. So you can sign up and I would listen to their Golden Moments program. Both Christian and I have been on that a number of times. If you want to explore more about this, you can look up Sidney Banks. Also, there are 2 other people that really talk about this understanding as it relates to addiction, and those are in our book too. But one is Joe Bailey, who wrote a book called The Serenity Principle. He wrote the book 30 years ago, and it's really a classic. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. And that's another really great one. And then another woman who has a regular podcast is and her name is Amy Johnson, and she's taking this, Dr. Amy Johnson, she's taken this in a huge way. She has a something called the Little School of Big Change. Both Christian and I work with people individually. We do coaching, we do intensives, we do, we're willing to do workshops or whatever. But if you want to look it up online, you'd look it up. We call it this principles paradigm, but you can, the 3 principles paradigm, you can look it up under the 3 principles. And again, it's growing tremendously. And then, of course, the conference is coming up in St. Paul in September 17th to the 19th. The principles of recovery transformation or something like that. I can't remember the name right now, but both Christian and I will be there. Joe Bailey, Amy Johnson, a lot of other people. So it's out there. It's just, we want to get the word out. So
definitely. And I appreciate you coming on today, and I will make sure that all these links end up in the description.
Thank you.
There's so much that has resonated with me that I don't always hear from the recovery community. I'd like to extend an invitation to any folks who kind of click with this sort of approach, an approach that's asking, why are we not happy when we're 5 years sober? Shouldn't something have changed by now? The group that I run and how I found out about your book actually was from Thursday night's Zoom group called Recovering Joy Peer Support Group, which is 7 to 8:30 p.m. Central or 8 to 9:30 p.m. Eastern. And we've been online every Thursday for a year. We're not aligned with any bigger kind of structured program. It's always free, and I will make sure that ends up in the link or in the description box below. One of the reasons why we're not affiliated with a bigger program is because, kind of like you've talked about this whole evening, there's not a lot of bigger structured programs that are having this discussion yet. There's a lot of disease model focused treatment. And it can be tough to find resources that kind of show people that there's more to recovery than just hypervigilance and going to daily meetings for the rest of your life. And it's such a hopeful message to me that I really hope the people who need to see this or would benefit from seeing this get the chance to see it. Check out your book. Much more so than talking about like which program is right or which program is wrong. I think so much of the time it's just a matter of fit for kind of what speaks to somebody's background or hopes or goals. Is there a group or an approach that you think tends to fit, or have you noticed that there's a certain group that really tends to click with your approach, perhaps more so than others?
We both feel very strongly, and one of the things that we put into the book is that there really is no other program on the face of the earth like 12-step recovery, the fellowship contained in 12-step recovery. So what we call it is the bridge of wisdom, that, where else in the world can you go 365 days a year for free and have that kind of support? The key, though, is to separate the wisdom from the human contamination and the dogma. And, we talk about that a lot in the book. So what a lot of people do is they throw the baby out with the bathwater. when it comes to 12-step recovery, which is unfortunate because, there's a lot of really good stuff. There's a tremendous amount of wisdom contained there. And so we do just sort of, as I have always done with my clients, just try to help people take what you like and leave the rest. I don't really know that much. I know about smart recovery, which to me smacks a lot of cognitive therapy, which, as you know, that's not the direction I think we need to go in, because again, you're trying to manipulate something that isn't designed to be manipulated. So just again, this is such a new paradigm. It's it's like I tell people, it's like turning around the Titanic. So again, the more you look in this direction, the more you're going to see, and the more transformative I think you'll find that it is. And then you'll find your way to using whatever programs, whatever fellowships, whatever you need to support you.
That's such a tremendous expression of equanimity, which I think is really, really important in 2020. I like what you said about let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, but maybe people can kind of use the same quiet listening. I use the word insight just because that's the word I know, but maybe people can use the same kind of insight to evaluate parts of a program or parts of a structured treatment to really figure out what's going to work for them. And there's so much room for people coming together around their common goal instead of having this divisive recovery community where, team 12 step is over here and team non-12 step is over here. So that is so refreshing to hear. And I've really enjoyed hearing from voices that are kind of, they're not content with just getting people sober. I think there's so much more to life in recovered living. And my hope is that y'all's book can help more people kind of explore that possibility, right? Any last thoughts, questions, stuff you want to put out there? I'm being sensitive.
I wonder if I could just read something. Could I read something from the book?
Of course.
Yeah, it's one of the last chapters that I got an email from one of my students who said, I'd sent him a couple of chapters of the book and said, what do you think? And he said, well, that's really, I feel so much more hopeful now, but what does this mean for my recovery? So I wrote him a letter, and I'd just like to read you that letter if that's okay.
Please.
Okay. Dear Peter, I was so happy to hear that you found a new sense of hope in reading the chapters I sent you. I wanted to take a moment to answer your question about how you might apply it to your recovery. First and foremost, we hope that it will help you to see that you are not your addiction and that you have within you an essence that is untarnished and whole. As your mind and body begin to recover from these last few years of substance use and emotional suffering, there is another world on the other side. As you start to see the light, you will find that it has always been there, just clouded by your invisible thinking that obscured your ability to see it. You may realize that the feelings of anger and hurt that seem to stem from your childhood fueled your desire to self-medicate with drugs. When you can see that they were caused by the misunderstanding about where those feelings came from, it can set you free. The less victimized you feel, the less likely you are to relapse. This can also help you because instead of identifying with the labels of numerous psychiatric diagnoses, it will serve to strengthen your footing in your innate mental health. The resilience, strength, and resourcefulness that you exhibited as an entrepreneur running several businesses over the years, several of which were actually legal, rescuing animals, and making your way independently in the world is likely to come to the fore and strengthen as the clouds of your invisible thought storm lift. It can help your recovery to know that addiction and the consequences that occurred in a clouded, stressed mind are not a life sentence. You have the built-in capacity through insight to wake up and see yourself and the world around you with more clarity. That in turn will change everything in your life, just like turning on headlights helps us find our way out of the darkness. It can help you to release the shame and self-recrimination about your behaviors over the years of your addiction when you come to realize that you and everyone else are doing the best they can at the level of awareness they have at any given time. No one would choose the pain and chaos of addiction if they could see the path out. We hope that it will save you from spending too much time looking in the rearview mirror and allow you to see yourself and your actions more compassionately. The support and wisdom to be found in your 12-step fellowship will be the ballast that will help you balance you during the time as you dig out of what must feel like a deep, dark hole at the moment. But rest assured, you have everything you need to flourish psychologically and spiritually and to find your way to a happy and contented life. We hope that this will point you to the discovery of the formless inner wellspring that can guide you to make better decisions, see through the illogic of the outside and misunderstanding, and find grounding. As you do, you will almost certainly uncover the serenity and peace of mind that has always been there just below the surface of your agitated mind. With more and more moments of gratitude and joy, the desire to use substances will diminish. I wish you the best in your recovery journey and hope that the book can act as a roadmap as you grow in your understanding.
Thank you so much for sharing a message of kind of hope and possibility and healing in a time when I think that's really what people um, I don't want to say need, but it seems like a positive message that will land with a lot of people, and very well written too, clearly. So if y'all want to learn more, definitely the book is available and will be linked in the description. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us.
Thank you, Miles. It's been a pleasure. Thanks
Yeah,
for having me.
yeah, and this is Barbara Smith of Addiction, One Cause, One Solution, written with Christian McNeil. The link to the book, as well as the resources mentioned, and the free Thursday night group that I run for anyone interested in recovering joy into their addiction recovery, will be in the description below. Anything else you wanted to add for folks?
No, just I wish you all well, and let us know what you think of the book. Give us a shout. We're happy to have a conversation.
Wonderful. And I appreciate that reaching out to the people who the book is resonating with and keeping it an open dialogue. From our chat box right here, we have Matt says, wonderful insights. Thank you. I really look forward to reading the book. It's really resonated with me in many ways. I think it would for many, many people. I look forward to reading the book myself. And thank you so much for sharing your time with us.
Thank you, Miles. Good luck to you. All the best. Bye-bye.